All right. Welcome everyone to the first Ask a Trainer. I'm excited about this. I hope that we're going to do more of them because I feel like it could be a really fun way to connect with the C Spot Run community. And I'm just going to start right away. I'm going to dive in with some questions immediately. So the very first question that we got was, how do you manage a dog who is very vocal on walks? Our dog howls at other dogs across the street and barks at people as well. The owner said he only wants to be greeted, but the vocalizations are annoying and sometimes they scare people. So this is a super, super, super common behavior. I'm sure if you have a dog who vocalizes on walks, you have also noticed that a lot of dogs vocalize on walks on leash. It's particularly common, I think, in the city too, because all of our dogs are pent up because we don't have backyards, or at least a lot of the time. And there's just so much stimulation when they're out on walks in urban areas. Even if your dog isn't particularly triggered by all of the sights and sounds of the city, the cars, just all of the noise pollution, um, you just have to think about dogs who are maybe genetically wired to be in a village or on a quiet farm or something, and we all have them in the city. That's a lot for their brains a lot of the time. So anyway, very common issue for sure. Probably the number one thing that we work on at C Spot Run. So in other words, there's a lot that I can and do say about this on a regular basis, but I tried to break down some bullet points just to give you a taste of my general answer, give you some inspiration for training exercises to do, and maybe give you some more specific questions to come back with next time. So, the first thing that I want you to think about is just your dog's general routine and practice of impulse control and not rehearsing barking, big, explosive, exciting behavior spontaneously, or demanding behavior, like if a dog runs up to you in the house and barks in your face because they want something, just think about that. Like, is this behavior that's happening on leash kind of coming up in other areas of your life? Because if it's a more general problem, maybe it mostly bothers you on a walk because it's embarrassing because other people witness it. But if it's something that's happening all the time, there's a good chance that it might be worth it to work on it all the time and not just on walks. Um, Same thing for just their general leash manners. If the dog is pulling a lot, if they're never checking in, never paying attention, never listening to cues on walks, that's also something that you're going to want to address if you want to address this leash reactivity, since the behavior on leash doesn't live in isolation, like it's connected to the other behaviors that your dog is doing. So that's just a general thing to think about. Also, as I alluded to earlier, you want to think about your dog's just general mental state and enrichment, because if they're feeling super anxious, if they are, like I said, pent up, they don't get enough exercise, not enough mental stimulation, and then you take them out on a walk, they are not going to be well behaved most of the time. So just consider that. I always tell people that for a dog who has moderate leash reactivity, enrichment probably isn't ever going to be the only answer, but for a lot of dogs, it's very relevant to the picture. So I'm not saying just wear your dog out, get them super tired, and everything will be okay, but it's usually relevant. So, in the actual moment, if your dog's seeing another dog or person or whatever the flavor of exact trigger is, if it's a particular kind of dog or person, the first thing that you want to do is always reward spontaneous disengagement or calm behavior. So, in other words, if the trigger is present and your dog sees that trigger and checks back in with you, we want to reward that. We want to reward the dog looking to you for guidance and leadership and information about what to do in that situation, as opposed to taking matters into their own hands and barking or whatever they think they should do. in that situation. Or even just if they see that trigger and they're just chilling out. So, a lot of times, people who have dogs who are like low to medium level leash reactive, especially if the dog is really small, the situations that are easy are seen as like passes. We're like, okay, the dog's not triggered, they're being calm, so I get to just like take a deep breath and go back to listening to my podcast and keep going on my walk. Where what I'm trying to shift your thought to is that those are the situations that are oftentimes most valuable training exercises because the dog can do the right thing. So they see the trigger, they can disengage, really pay attention to those moments and try to reward them and reinforce them instead of going, oh, thank God, I don't have to worry about it. I'm just going to keep going for my walk now. Um, and the reason I said a lot of times small dogs we don't do this is because I feel like uh, when you have a small dog who's reactive, it mostly feels annoying when they're just really having a big, huge, explosive moment. Whereas if I had a 90-pound dog who was starting to get a little bit worked up, I'm 5'2". That's usually bothersome to me immediately if I have a 90-pound dog who's kind of pulling on leash and starting to get a little worked up. So I just wanted to explain what I meant by comparing the small and big dogs. I feel like it's easier to let the little things go with the small guys. But anywho, yeah, so we're going to reward spontaneous disengagement, checking in with you, or at minimum, just calm behavior in the presence of the trigger. We want to reward with whatever reward is meaningful for your dog. So a treat, space away from something that's stressing them out, whatever that flavor of stress is, some movement, being able to sniff a good fire hydrant or bush or patch of grass or whatever, all of those things, whatever your dog cares about most, giving them that reward for being good in that moment. And then if my dog is not spontaneously disengaging, they're not checking in with me and they're not being calm, they're starting to stare at the dog, they're loading up, they're becoming tense, or they're already lunging, vocalizing, etc. We want to consistently, religiously interrupt that behavior. I'm going to do that with my voice and my body language. And sometimes for some dogs, I can leave it at that. I can leave it with that informal direction, and that's good enough, right? I'm interrupting them. I'm getting their attention back on me, and then I'm going to reward them being good again, basically. And for a lot of dogs who have moderate leash reactivity, I need to formalize what that interruption means. And I'm going to formalize it with my specific training skills that we work so hard on in all of our lessons in our group classes. That's our heel or our follow at my side behavior, a turn away from distraction, which in most cases is a version of healing. So the dog is looking at the other dog. I ask them to turn around and come follow me. A sit stay with focus, a down stay with calm or focus associations. I'm going to plug those in to that equation. And if my dog cannot do those things in the presence of another dog, that is what our training sessions are for. That's what our private lessons are for. And the last bullet point that I have is directly related to that. A lot of times I meet people who have dogs who encounter leash activity situations that are always just kind of not right for training. Someone pops out of nowhere, your dog gets really excited, and then the trigger is gone before you have time to work through that moment. And I always tell people, in a perfect training world, what would happen is I would flag that person down and be like, hey, can you like hang out here for 5 to 10 more minutes so I can have my dog work through this emotion and get over it? But, that would really creep our neighbors out and they wouldn't agree to it probably. So that's why a lot of times in those particular cases where like the problem only happens in kind of unique situations, I have to go out of my way to train through that because like the real life situation is not a good training opportunity. So I have to figure out what the other good training opportunity is. That might mean instead of just doing your walks where things are just randomly too crazy sometimes, maybe going to a park where you have some more space, you have distance from the triggers, and you can work through things more thoroughly. That might be the answer. The other thing about going to a park is that you might have the opportunity, a better opportunity rather, to see like a stream of triggers, um, as opposed to on your walk. If you want to work on leash reactivity, maybe you only see one or two dogs on your 30-minute walk, whereas if you went to a park or something as a training field trip, you might see a dog every 3 minutes or something, and that might be better for just doing those training drills. So again, this is something that I could probably talk about for hours because there's a lot that goes into it, but those are the main points for how I work on vocalization, or leash reactivity towards dogs and other people, particularly towards dogs, though I feel like that's a uniquely tricky situation because they've got that dog to dog communication that they do. The other thing I would say is this question mentioned he only wants to be greeted. I always have people try to take a step back when we've got leash reactivity that's been rehearsed sometimes for months and for years. Take a step back from being so certain of the narrative that we've attached to the dog's motivation. This is one in particular that I really could talk about like so much because we get into the different personalities and different motivations, and all, dogs have all kinds of nuance, obviously. But just reconsider what exactly the dog might be thinking. I also often will tell people when they're like, "Oh, like my dog's like friendly. Why are they doing this? My dog is friendly," and but they're acting so stressed and they're acting, not friendly. Dogs can have multifaceted emotions just the way that people can. So I feel like that's kind of a breakthrough idea for a lot of people, because we get stuck on our narratives that we attach to our dogs, but they are complex emotional creatures, not dissimilar to humans. And, your dog can be excited and scared at the same time. Your dog can be, um, happy, excited, and so frustrated that it's actually just stressful and maybe even mostly starts to override the happy excitement. Your dog can be um, fearful and guarding. Those are multifaceted things. They can really be a lot of those all at once. And at the end of the day, with leash activity, when you take any of those emotions and crank it up to level 11 out of 10, um, the main point is that it's just too much emotion and excitement, period. And we need to turn that down and calm it down. Um, so yeah, that's what I have to say about that. A second question that we got that was really similar to this is, oh, we have someone else entering the room. The person who asked the question that I just answered. um, the next question that we had that's really similar is, my dog is great off leash, but on leash is super reactive. So, this question has a different layer because we know for a fact that the dog is good off leash. And so, in terms of motivation, some of that is answered by what we definitely know about the dog's social skill and what's not wrong with them, in other words. So, I would definitely say everything that I just said for the first person that had the question about leash reactivity, but without the specification of off leash behavior, all of our interruptions and our skills. But on top of that, I just wanted to mention or kind of reflect on like what's going on here because this is something that's also very common, and I think some people are really confused by it because their dog is acting so differently off leash versus on leash. And this happens with reactions to dogs and people. It happens for other stuff too. Happens for just the dog like wanting to get from point A to point B. And when you clip a leash on them, that restraint and frustration makes them act like a maniac in a way that they don't normally act. So this might seem obvious, but also interesting at the same time, if that makes sense. But when we have a leash on the dog, their movement is restricted, right? Like you say that and it's like, oh, duh, of course it is. But what's important is that dogs are primarily body language communicators. They use their movement to communicate with other animals, with each other, and with people. They use their movement to express themselves. They use their movement to self regulate. Like, people are very vocal, you know, we come from monkeys and we go ooh 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 ooh, ooh ah, ah ah ah, like we've got all this vocal stuff really programmed in. Dogs are not that vocal. Like they make noises, but they're mostly not talking to each other the way that we're talking to each other. I think mostly when dogs make noises, it's basically just a little burst of like, I'm feeling a lot right now, most of the time. So they're body language communicators, they're movement communicators. Something that we see, I feel like this really kind of spells it all out. Something that we see really often is we'll have a dog come in for a social assessment, meaning we don't have history on that dog and we don't know really how they feel about other dogs, and they're being very, very leash reactive. They look nasty. They look aggressive. They look like they're going to rip someone's throat out when they're on leash. And we want to figure out like what's actually going through your head, because we know that behavior on leash is not a reliable indicator of their actual social motivation. So we take them into the play yard. We've got some helper dogs that are really calm and not bothered by this kind of thing. We're not doing any puppy torture, but we've got some helper dogs who will be in confined areas, like little not boxes, like kennel runs inside a big play yard. So we've got dogs in there, but they're safely blocked by fences that are secure. We let that helper dog into the play yard and let them see the dog, and they're off leash around dogs, possibly for the first time in that dog's known history. And we're looking at what is the dog's behavior in a more organic situation, as opposed to seeing them on leash when they're restrained and they're pulling and they're already, you know, it's not an organic situation. So they come into the yard. Oh my gosh, there's other dogs there. Many, many dogs who are, like I said, absolutely nasty looking on leash enter that yard, see that there's dogs in the yard, and pretend that they don't see them and walk along the line of the fence and don't go up to them right away. And you would think that this dog would be so forward and that they would run up because of how they act on leash. But something that's really interesting is, you know, when given the opportunity to take space, the dog does take space. And so point is, that is what a lot of dogs would do if they could, because that's what's natural and that's how they regulate themselves and that's how they, you know, take a greeting really calmly and kind of make their way up to things to investigate. And because of what walking on leash is like, we're going in a straight line. And when we see stuff, like we have a path that we're going on already, and you can't move away because we're walking on a straight line, that takes away the dog's natural ability to regulate and take things really slowly. And so that is one of the reasons why behavior can be so different on leash and then off leash, is just because we've taken away their natural resources and their natural movement and self-regulation. Some dogs also have a really strong what's called startle reflex. I think dogs who are bred or have the genes, even if it wasn't on purpose, to alert to things. I think both of the dogs on this call now have this going on actually. When they're a really alert dog that's just has a flip that switches in their brain, and when something is new, they alert and they bark and they go, "That's a new thing. That's a new thing. That's a new thing." Um, Even without the leash factor, they can kind of just forget that it's an option to take things slowly too. So my whole goal is just to slow them down in that situation and retrain them to not rush up and feel like they have to deal with it. Basically, take it slow. Look to me instead. keep some distance here. And so, like I said, everything that I said before for the skills, but then we've also just got that layer of like thinking about the fact that in many situations, dogs will naturally take a lot of space and not just walk in a straight line up to something. So think about that when your dog is on leash to help them slow down through those situations. I'm gonna pause here for a moment while I prepare my next question too. And if anyone, maybe if you guys want to type in the chat box if you have any follow-up questions about that, and I'll wait like a minute. And if I don't hear anything, I will jump into the next question. I don't know, drink tea for a second. It's actually so intense to talk at a camera for an hour. Just putting that out there. It's a lot of mental endurance. Hi, Jeff. You had a great question. It's actually the first one that I answered. So I'm just gonna send you the pre or not pre-recorded, the recorded version of this because it's what I mostly talked about for the first 15 minutes. That's okay. Honestly, I should have thought about it and flipped it around, but your question was just so good and relevant to so many people that I wanted to start with it also while I had the most juice when I had the most gas in the tank. So yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you came in at the tail end of it. Okay. Yeah, I will definitely send you the recording for sure. Okay, cool. I'm gonna jump into the next thing. Um, which is what is the best way to balance an athletic and intelligent dog? I thought this question was very interesting. Um, and um, I love athletic and intelligent dogs. Like that sounds kind of elitist to say it like that, but dogs who are really high drive and high energy are my favorite types of dogs. I just really like dogs who their problem is that they need to slow down and just put all of those hamsters in their brain on the same wheel. That's a metaphor that I just created right now. I hope it makes sense. Get them all on the same wheel, get them all working together instead of running all over the place. So there's tons that you could say about athletic and intelligent dogs, but I think the first thing that this made me think of when I read it is the idea of fulfilling our dogs, like really fulfilling them. And I'm going to give you just an example that I feel like kind of sums up my biggest thoughts on this. So I meet lots of dogs who I especially met these dogs in Portland, Oregon when I lived in Portland, who play fetch for they play so much fetch. Like their owner has definitely internalized and understood like my dog needs lots of exercise and so they love the ball. It's easy to just do it with tons of fetching. And so the dog is getting lots of physical stimulation for sure. Like thoroughly worn out every day. And that's awesome. But sometimes I meet those dogs, a lot of times they're working line dogs, and there's still this like restlessness. And you wear them out with fetch, and that like calm doesn't really last for more than 30 minutes or an hour or 2 hours or whatever. It just doesn't last enough to beat this restlessness that the dog has, and it seems like they're unfulfilled. And we start doing some training with that dog. I am one of my favorite things to do is once we've kind of worked on the basics or solved whatever, other behavior problem that's going on with the dog, I like to do trick training and sport training with people. So I oftentimes start to get them hooked on that, or I sneak it into their training before they even know it. And when we start really working on problem solving with that dog, like they really have to think and figure out exactly what it is that you want and figure out exactly how to move their body very precisely in the way that we're looking for. Something that's really interesting is even those dogs who are super physically conditioned and play fetch like crazy are worn out from those problem solving trick training sessions and really like mentally fatigued in a way that does not happen during fetch. Some of that is just by the nature of the game fetch itself. It's extremely mindless, it's very repetitive. I'm not saying it's bad, but if all your dog is doing is fetching, that is not something they have to think very hard about, right? They can go on airplane mode the whole time, they can zone out, they can just chase the ball. That's not a mentally taxing exercise. So that's even different than if you were like taking your dog on a hike and they were running around and like sniffing stuff and exploring using their brain a little bit. Fetch in particular, very mindless and repetitive. And so, yeah, I've just met all of these people who are like, oh my God, I did 8 minutes of trick training and my dog was worn out as if we had done 40 minutes of fetch. So I just think that that's really neat. And obviously, I would say like no dog was bred to do tricks for the most part. So it's not like I'm saying this is genetic fulfillment and border collies need to herd like they're on sheep and our hounds need to sniff like they're tracking. It's not that same kind of thing, but there's just something to be said about the fact that many working dogs were bred to problem solve specifically. So if you have a dog who is bred to work sheep or something, there's a good chance you're not going to buy a flock of sheep or you're not going to get invested in a hobby that you have to drive 3 hours away to take them herding. There's this interesting substitute of just figuring out other ways to make them really think that is fulfilling like nothing else, like very few other activities. So that's one of my favorite ways to balance a dog who's athletic and intelligent because I've got high drive, high energy dogs. I don't always have time to run them to the ground every day. And I personally have found success with, on our slow days, I can do some trick training sessions and they are just as happy. Um, and it's a win for me because as a dog trainer, I enjoy dog training, believe it or not. So it's something that I do with my dogs a lot. The other thing that I would say about, a kind of different way of looking at this question, dogs athletic and intelligent, what is important for them, is there's a good chance that a dog who is athletic and intelligent is also prone to getting into trouble, right? So they're smart, they find the trouble, and they're athletic, so they're probably high energy, and so they're likely to be high energy about the wrong things sometimes. And so, if that is what you're working with personality wise, I think it is really important to have really solid obedience skills on those dogs so that no matter how excited they are, no matter how much they've gotten a good, tricky idea because they're so smart, at the end of the day, we have influence over them through our training. We can ask them to come when called. We can ask them to do a stay when we need to so that we can keep them out of trouble. And I feel like this is increasingly not the most popular idea in dog training. I feel like things have really shifted to just look at, fulfilling the dog's needs and kind of working through things from that perspective. And a lot of ways for the industry that's been nice. I think it's nice that we're thinking about like what do I have to do to keep my dog healthy? Because in the beginning of dog training, I think a lot of people weren't thinking about that, which is weird, right? But we're thinking about it now, and some people are not valuing our formal obedience skills as much as trainers. Um, so I'm advocating for keeping that in the roster, right? I think that we should have good skills and those skills should be proofed against distraction so that I know that I can keep my dog out of trouble basically, and no matter what situation is going on, for the most part I can ask my dog to do something if I need them to stay out of trouble basically. And that's something I use a lot with my own dogs personally. I have dogs who have very strong personalities. Left to their own devices in many situations, they would be doing something crazy, both of my dogs. And I like that about them. I that's my kind of dog. And the way that I manage that with my own dogs is that at the end of the day, they can come when called, they can walk on a leash, they can do a sit, they can do it down. My dog Mars is, for example, actually not really good with other dogs. She's a bitchy herdy breed is the personality profile. So she's grumpy. She doesn't like it when other dogs are doing anything. Basically, she's like, you should stop that. And so there are many times where I have had her like at a friend's house with a dog, a family member, a dog, whatever. She's not being nice with that dog, and so she gets to do a 2 hour downstay, and that's fine. Like, so it's not something that I would make her deal with every single day, but it's gotten me through many logistical situations, and it's very useful and cool when you can do that. Like, oh, you're not being successful here. What are my options? I can get you out of this situation. I can put you in a crate. I can take you home, or you can just chill out and you can do a downstay for 2 hours, and then we can do whatever else I brought you here for. Go on a walk with my brother and sister at my mom's house, whatever it is. Um, okay, so that's that. Those are my thoughts on an athletic and intelligent dog. But I had one other clarifying question in the chat here that I'm going to go back to. Do you think do you think continually walking with treats is a good idea? So oftentimes my goal for behaviors that my dog is practicing every day is that if the situation is not hard for them, I don't want to have to make a big production out of rewarding it. So, good example would be my dog Cupid. He is a big, tough-looking dog. Anytime people pass us on the sidewalk, I have him sit. And the reason that I do that is so that people can see that I have control over him because, I'm in a neighborhood where I feel like plenty of people don't necessarily like dogs. He's big. I've seen lots of dogs be bad on walks, as a dog trainer. So it's really important to me that I'm not worrying people when I'm out in public with my dog because he is so big and because I'm small and he's got an intense face. Like, I just don't want people to be worried that he's going to go up to them. And so every single time someone passes, I have him sit so they can just see that they're safe on the sidewalk and that he doesn't care about other people like at all most of the time. He's not even really looking at them, and so that behavior is not hard for him. He sits for a second. His reward is basically that I let him get up again and go back to walking, and so that's not a situation where he needs a toy or food, right? It's easy for him to do. I don't need to reward it. He does it. He sits right away. He knows the routine. It's a piece of cake. We can move on. um, so for situations like that, you don't have to worry about formally doing some big production every time your dog behaves well. Especially if you've got some kind of like small life reward, like I said, like continuing the walk or sniffing a spot or whatever that is a good enough reward. But for things that are hard, for asking my dog to ignore something or turn away from something that they're really concerned about or really interested in or anything like that, I think it is a good idea to make sure that you have a meaningful reward that you can deliver to your dog after most of those repetitions, if not all of them. So, in other words, like if you take a walk and most of the time things are fine and everything is pleasant, which it's I'm guessing because of your question this is not the case, but if it's all good, it's all good, and you don't need to be taking food on your walk. And if your dog is doing things for you that is hard, and if a treat is one of the most meaningful rewards that we can give him in that situation, then you probably should be taking rewards on every walk. And in fact, you also probably want to be really careful about accidentally teaching your dog the difference between a training walk and a non-training walk. You kind of want your dog to think that it's always a training walk if the walks are challenging for them. So that means, be careful about them learning that if I'm the dog right now, if I didn't just get 15 cookies over the last 15 minutes, it means when I see a person, I should bark because I can tell that this isn't a training walk. We want to keep things more organic than that, right? So I want to be consistent with having rewards and asking for skills and doing that throughout the walks instead of just being like, every once out of 4 days, I'm feeling really on top of it. And I go out there and I drill and I drill and I drill, sit down, heel, and I'm giving cookies all the time. Like, that's a great energy and that's a great start if that's what we're working with in the beginning. But you want to be careful that the dog isn't like, oh, this is training time. And then when my handler is not acting like that and they're on their phone and they're not talking to me and they're not asking me to do anything, everything's super, super different. So that's a little bit different than what you asked me, but I feel like it's related because I think a lot of times when people are in like a plateau or they're in like an intermediate stage of training, that becomes a factor where they're practicing really being on it or not being on it. But yeah, based on what you asked me and your follow-up question, it sounds like you should probably be walking with food for your walks, at least for right now. And if the world is hard for your dog and they need to keep working hard to be good in the world, then maybe you need to have your rewards ready on kind of like a maintenance plan because they're still working really hard to be good all the time. Okay, cool beans. Well, my next question is, can you discuss different types of location and release markers? And then the asker also said, is that too much? Because they know that it's a big question. And this was asked by one of the trainers at C Spot Run, one of our junior trainers. And the answer is yes, I can say a little bit, but this is another thing that many trainers dedicate lots and lots of educational material to. So I will probably just direct you to that for further research, but different types of location and release markers. So our marker that we use most often at C Spot Run is just yes, and yes means you're going to get food. A lot of our clients also say get it. Get it means I'm going to throw food for you and you can go chase it. And so that's an example of two different markers, and those markers tell the dog what they should expect in terms of how they are receiving that food or how they are collecting that reward, which matters in a situation like if my dog is in a sit stay and I expect them to hold that stay while I deliver the food for them. That's totally different than if I expect them to get up and run and chase food, which is why we have different words for each of those things. There are some trainers who get even more specific about that with a bunch of markers that tell the dog a bunch of different things. Stay in place and I'll feed you. Run to my hand and come get the food. I'm going to throw food for you to visually track and chase and eat. I'm going to kind of scatter a couple of treats for you to sniff and find out. You're not supposed to visually track that. You're supposed to use your nose. I'm going to throw a toy. I'm going to have you strike a toy to play tug. Those are all different reward sequences that some trainers might use different words for. And so there's been a movement within the last few years, especially with sport dogs, to get really, really, really specific about this. I personally think that that's very cool. I really like it. I like watching it be done. I have heard some trainers discuss that it has gone too far and the dog does not need a 30 marker vocabulary to get the job done. And at a certain point, we might be overcomplicating things. I think both of those concepts are valid. I have a lot of markers for my own sport dogs, but I've had a couple of instances where I'm like, these two markers that I have are basically the same thing. And so maybe I could have just had one marker. And the reason that it all matters, like I said, the dog has an expectation of how the reward will happen. For a lot of dogs, this really matters for arousal levels. So if my dog isn't sure if I'm going to hand them a cookie or whip a chuck-it ball across the room, those are really different headspaces for them to inhabit, right? That's why that matters for expectation. If you don't have words that tell your dog which thing is going to happen. If you don't say yes versus fetch or get it, whatever, the dog just figures it out from context clues, right? So sometimes in some situations that might be confusing for the dog. For a lot of pet situations, it's not super relevant because you're not doing most of your training with a chuck it ball. A lot of the pet dogs aren't so motivated by toys that it makes sense to work through things like that, etc. Um, think about the where of your markers for the location element. And I think that that is something that's interesting. And I think it matters for pet training too, because even if I don't have a marker that tells my dog, I'm going to throw food behind you versus I'm going to throw it right to your face, or I want you to run to me. So think about how all of those things influence the dog. The dog's 30 feet away from me. If they're expecting something to go backwards, they're probably going to be staying in place and really preparing to go behind them. If they're thinking about me coming towards them, they're probably still and they're anticipating me moving. Maybe they're even creeping forward a little bit because they're trying to meet me halfway. If they're anticipating moving towards me, they're probably really thinking about weight shifting forward and running towards me. So that's going to influence their behavior. And we can have different markers that help the dog's expectations there. But the other thing to think about is if you're consistently training a skill like a stay at the distance, you can have the same effect without necessarily having a different marker. And this is what is happening when trainers don't have 30 different markers that they use. You just have to think about, if my dog is at a distance, I don't want them to creep forward. My reward sequence, regardless of what mark I use, my reward sequence should consistently be something that keeps them in place, thinking about going behind them or staying there waiting for me instead of exploding forward. Because if they're thinking about exploding forward, that's unhelpful anticipation in that situation. So even if I'm just saying yes or get it, like how I normally would, just consistently patterning the dogs at a distance. I'm always rewarding them behind or in place. I'm very rarely or never having them run forward off of that place if I'm trying to build stability in that position. So you can pattern the reward sequence of location or the where of the reward without necessarily having a marker that is different. Now, for dogs who are super drivey and also working with toys a lot, I think that having different toy markers is particularly important, because even if I have a dog who I have rewarded in place 5,000 times, if that dog loves the ball being thrown so much or striking the tug so much, they're really hoping, no matter what, they're always super hopeful that I'm about to cue them to run and grab the tug. Um, uh, just having the most consistent routine possible to let them know that that's not what's about to happen, I think can be helpful. So very big topic, but that's my little spiel about location and release markers for you. Hopefully it wasn't so general that it's not helpful, because I was trying to keep it kind of general. My last question, unless we have any follow-up questions from the people that are in the chat. Oh, let me restart my phone video. Okay. My last question was, do you recommend any workshops or seminars of other trainers? I love workshops and seminars by other trainers. They are very inspiring to me typically, and I think that anyone who's a dog trainer should regularly be attending workshops and seminars from other trainers, for the record. So great question. Keep at it. You're on the right track for being the best dog trainer possible. I personally really like going to sport seminars and just consuming a lot of sport content. I think I'm unique in this regard to some extent, but I really translate sport stuff into my coaching of humans a lot. It just all makes sense to me. Like I have a weird thing where I feel like my human clients, like I really like coaching them, and to me, like they are my sport dogs in some ways. And obviously, like I also really like sport dog training, and I do sport training and trick training with my own dogs. But, even though sport training can be so, so different than pet dog training, I feel like it's just generally inspirational to get really good at coaching and figuring out how to influence behavior, sometimes in very exciting situations, right? Since sports are a lot of very exciting, high arousal scenarios. So, anywho, I like sports stuff the best. Most recently, I went to the Forrest Mickey's seminar, and it was so good. I love him so much. I love you, Forrest. He kind of knows who I am. Not that much, though. And the other sports seminar that came to mind was Shade Weitzel. I follow a lot of her curriculum for bite work training and control around toys. It is my understanding that she did not invent a lot of that stuff, but I think she popularized a lot of it for a broader audience, and so I think she's kind of mother in that way. And I don't do everything exactly the way that she does for all of my sport training, but I feel like for foundations, it's really helpful to just have really clear and crisp understanding for your dog. So Forrest Mickey, Shade Weitzel. Um, for I think that seeing working dog stuff is really cool and inspirational, even if you don't do working dog stuff. So I interned at Logan Haas Kennel, and I went to several of Mike Suttle's seminars before I interned there, and then while I was interning there. I think that just seeing that world, seeing dogs who just wake up every day and do a job, and that job is really intense, and high level, and the training is really intense and high level, or at least the expectation of what the dog is doing is really intense and high level. I think as a dog trainer, it's very valuable to really see that and appreciate how that's done. I also saw a Pat Nolan seminar that was so good that I cried. And it included footage of a dog who had a camera on their head and was being talked to through a speaker on their collar as they went into a building and did a building search. I actually can't remember what for. Explosives, a bad guy being in there, maybe explosives. I feel like it was a nosework thing. Um, and the seminar was about directional control, being able to teach a dog to go left, right, behind them. Obviously, in that situation, it was at such a distance that it was just through a speaker, and the handler wasn't there. That's what made me cry. It was so cool. So, like I said, seeing high level stuff like that, even if you're never going to do it, I think that as a trainer, just being exposed to it is really awesome. For like sciencey stuff, honestly, I don't have a huge tolerance for seminars or webinars that are super duper technical and sciencey. So, my recommendation was just going to be if you want like a general introduction to operant behavior, blippity bloppity stuff. I like Bob Bailey. Um, well, everyone loves Bob Bailey, but I like the webinars that he did for the Lemonade conference. I felt like they were really good, like 101 introductions. So that's my recommendation there. Also, a lot of the sport people and working dog people that I like reference a lot of Bob Bailey content. So, he's the goat and everything. And then lastly, for pet behavior stuff, I've seen a lot of pet behavior webinars and content that's honestly very boring. So I only put one person on this list because I kind of blanked out on who else I've seen that was good. No offense out there, but a lot of it is super entry level. But I saw Sarah Strumming present on inter-household, meaning dog to dog aggression, a presentation on how to live with dogs who don't always get along. And it was very thorough and organized well. And I felt like it was valuable. Even if you kind of like know all of that stuff and you do all of that stuff, I feel like for a lot of people at least, having a framework for how you approach those sessions, with like a template or a rubric can be really helpful because a lot of times clients come in and they're really emotional. These are problems that are really big and impacting their life, and for a lot of people, they're very attached to their dogs, and stuff that happens with our dogs really hits a part of our brain and our heart that we're not always used to. And so sometimes that really influences that person's communication in your sessions, and it can be really helpful to just have like a skeleton of what needs to get done always living in the back of your head, so that at the end of the day those sessions aren't they feel productive. So, a little bit of venting is okay. I'm always here for that. I'm always gonna, have empathy for the stress of dealing with problem behaviors, but it's also my job to keep us on track to some extent and to make you feel like our time together is productive. And so having a framework is very helpful for that. And so again, Sarah Strumming, good presentation. I know she has a podcast and everything, but I would say any like webinars or seminars that you come across from her are going to be good, because her thing was very organized and super super duper structured, which I like. So that's it. Those are my recommendations. I for sure I'm gonna leave today and be like, oh my god, I can't remember to say XYZ person that I saw and I really loved, but those are my favorites. Um, that's everything. Those are all of my questions. I hope you guys liked it. I'm gonna end the recording here if you guys want to come say hi to me, if I can find the button. Okay, here it goes. Okay, goodbye, pre recorded watching people.